All right. Well, we're 3 minutes past the hour. It seems like we still have a decent number of people trickling in, but I will keep the poll open until we get past, introductions when we can share results. So I will close that on my screen now, and we can, like I said, go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We're gonna start out by sharing a little bit of background from Rachel and I, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists who we are definitely excited to have introduce themselves and also to hear their perspectives as we talk about, the point of this webinar. I'm gonna keep it short, and I'll do Rachel and me together, just so again we can focus on the panelists. We both, as I mentioned, we used to be examiners. We've actually worked at all three of those in the list we gave you. We've been at big law firms. We've been in house, and now we have BlueFoot. And we really started BlueFoot. It's an IP strategy software company, and our secret sauce is marrying financial and patent data and creating supervised machine learning so that we can categorize that data, get insights, and make recommendations from that categorized data at the industry and product category level. So if you're interested, we're here after the webinar, but with that, I want to pass it on to our panelists as well. And Bobby, do you mind going to the next slide? So before I do introductions, very quickly, as you all know, we're here to talk about how we consider financial and market data for corporate patent strategy. And we couldn't be more excited to have the panelists that we have here talking about this. So if we go to the next slide, we will start with Alyssa Sandrowitz, who is the director of IP and the lead IP person at Gates Corporation. Then Deb Miedema, who's Google's head of competitive intelligence, will share a bit about herself, and we'll end with Ola Adekunle, who is Google's new head of patent engagement readiness, which we're very excited for him for. So Alyssa, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ramya. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I am happy to share my experience here today from the manufacturing side, because I think sometimes, again, even within a house perspective, there's a, some differences versus the software and the high tech versus manufacturing versus biotech. So I'm excited to provide that kind of different aspect.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks. So Deb, I'm not sure if you're still sharing your intro, but unfortunately, I think there are some connection issues, and we're not getting a lot of it. Would you mind maybe calling into the webinar? That might be, that way we definitely don't want to miss your perspectives as we continue. But in the meantime, Ola, we'd love to pass it along to you for an introduction as well.
Thanks, Ramya, Rachel. It's great to be on this panel. My name is Ola Adekunle. I've been at Google for about 5.5 years. Prior to that, I was in-house at HPE, and before that, for about 5.5 years as well. And before that, I was at various law firms in the DC area and Texas. So currently, my role, I'm the head of patent engagement readiness at Google. My team, sub-team sits within Google's patent transactions team, which is part of Google's global patent team. And I oversee a team of attorneys and technologists that are responsible for patent-related engagements like licensing and litigation, so litigation support. So my team does uses a lot of tools, vendors, market data, patent data to value patent, to do our modeling, to do balance of trade analysis. So we kind of live and breathe these every day, especially Deb, who's a part of my team that does this day in, day night. So happy to share more. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ola. And Deb, do you want to try again?
I think Deb is trying to maybe dial in, so we'll wait for her. And then in the meanwhile, for the attendees, we have a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to ask questions there as our panelists share their thoughts. I will, kind of during their transitions, I'll if there are questions that are on the topic that they discuss, I will ask those questions on behalf of you. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, so when we consider financial and market data for patent strategy, we wanted to approach this in a kind of to start with why, right? And we will credit our panelists for for the flow of how we're thinking about this, right? But really, when we think about, how do we consider this disparate types of data in corporate patent strategy, the biggest question is why use it, right? Why use it, and how do you know if it's actually useful? How do we measure its efficacy? Once we talk about that at a high level, we're going to go into a little bit more of the practical stuff, right? How do you actually use the data, right? What are the outcomes you're looking for? And then what data is helpful to actually bring in as you're incorporating financial and market data in your corporate patent strategy? So our goal with this webinar was to keep it broad so that we could, enable a robust conversation, which I know we will have here. And then I think I see someone join on the phone, so I'm going to allow them to talk and hope that's Deb.
Ramya, can you hear me now?
Yes, hi Deb.
I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, these things happen. It's, I think we've all had enough Zoom calls where something goes wrong. So, if this is the worst that happens in this webinar, it's not that bad.
I'm not sure how much of the intro you all caught.
None of it.
Perfect. Then I don't need to worry about starting over. So I'm Deb Miedema. I've been on the patents team for about 12 years at Google. And before that, I was at Fisher Richardson for a decade. My work is primarily around identifying and analyzing patents for a bunch of different purposes: infringement, validity, counter assertion, licensing. That means I need to understand the competitive landscape, like what products companies are launching, what they do, how they work, how they relate to our patents or products or vision. And I have to evaluate companies' product and company strategies in addition to their filing strategies and patent portfolios. So I spend time identifying potential threats and partners, and all of this is in support of the patent engagement and transaction team that Ola heads up, as well as our litigation team. And it is a job I love, honestly.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much for joining by phone and sharing the intro. We appreciate it. So we just went over, the agenda, and we want to dive right in. So we want to ask each of your perspective in this, right? Why use financial and market data in your strategy? And then we'll get to kind of the measurement of that, of whether that's useful or not later on, but really why use this in your strategy? And Deb, since you just gave the intro, I'm going to turn it back to you and make you keep talking.
Yeah, so I mean, the key thing that we're trying to do, or at least I'm trying to do, is anticipate who's going to sue us next, or who's going to come knocking on our door next. And if I can anticipate who that is, I can better prepare for that conversation. There are only so many decisions I can make from patent data alone, though. I can look at the size of portfolio and compare it to ours and break it down into different, technology slices or whatever. But none of that will tell me how likely a company is to sue us or come to us for a licensing discussion. But and I can try and extrapolate how litigious a company is from historical litigation data, but that doesn't warn me about when we'll be the first company that they choose to sue. So, a change to a company's financial status or market position is often a really important cue to whether or not they would choose to begin a litigation campaign. So it's really important for us to take a look at that data.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing Google is often the first company a lot of people choose to sue. So you might not have the market indicators that are out there. They're saying, hey, this company is going to come after us next. But when you're doing that, what are you, I guess, how has that inclusion of financial and market data changed how you're valuing your portfolio strategy, right? As you're bringing that in, or as you're deciding on, these companies might be potential threats, or this entity might be a potential threat. How is that changing how you're approaching portfolio strategy?
Yeah, so I might monitor a company that's operating in our space, or in a space we're considering entering, to see if they've had like good or bad revenue reports, or increases or decreases in their market share, maybe good or bad reviews of their recently launched products or services. And any of that can trigger an effort to bolster our portfolio in that space, or do some deeper analysis on patents that we already have, so that we can get prepared.
That makes sense. And before I ask the other two questions, because I think those are more measurement focused, I want to get perspectives from the other panelists. So, Ola or Alyssa, would either of you mind sharing kind of your perspective on, why you're bringing in the financial and market data, what you're solving for, and kind of how it's changing how you're viewing or you're valuing your portfolio strategy?
Sure, I'll take that, because unlike Google here at Gates and like a lot of other industries where we're not the big tech companies, again, we're a mid-cap company, we're in manufacturing, we're older technology. I mean, Gates has been around for 111 years now, and we're, have a large automotive supply business, right? So again, it's mechanical, industrial parts. So it's very different. We're not, as an industry, we're not nearly as litigious. So rather, the flip side of what Deb's doing, we use it more to develop our portfolio in the sense of we have limited resources, right? And how do we get the most value for the resources we have? So some of that is looking at the size of the market, where we're going to be, where our competitors are, so that maybe we want competing rights, so that we have something for risk mitigation purposes. I can't talk today. If you can't tell, I'm losing my voice a little bit. But so it's we don't get sued a lot. We don't sue a lot, but rather, again, we're a market leader in our space. We have a handful of competitors. We all kind of like to have similar portfolios. So I think that, again, everybody's kind of on the even playing field, and nobody really, every so often we're like, we're going to do something. But I like to be able to say to my C-suite, to my executive leadership, this has been a blockbuster product for us, new product. This is what we did to maintain that competitive advantage for this product. And this is the reasons why we chose. It's a lot of like filing strategy of why we chose, why we went where we went.
And when you're saying that, are you thinking about just the specific product categories or areas? Or are you thinking about various countries and stuff as well? Because I know
aside from the product category areas, it's specifically to countries. It can be based on the market size. For those who haven't seen BlueFoot, so not that I'm doing this as a promo, I loved, as you know, Rachel and Ramya, when I was able to get the data that gave us in that particular product sector or industry sector for us, what the size of the market from a revenue standpoint was, so I could target my largest revenue generating markets appropriately and balance our business objectives with the financials and the patent portfolio.
And this is a question for everybody. It might be more applicable for you, Alyssa, but I'm definitely curious for Ola and Deb's perspectives as well. Are you also considering this, this kind of non-patent data for the down risk or the downstream supply chain, right? Because I know for the automotive industry, it's a huge supply chain that you're bringing into Gates, and you're part of a larger supply chain that's going to other car manufacturers, right? And for Google, I would assume, especially as they're getting into more products, that's also, all the different components and things that you're sourcing. Are you, are these affecting those kinds of deals as well? Or, your view on IP in that sense?
Yeah, I would say increasingly over the last couple of years, as Google, as you all know, stepped into the hardware space with our phones, with our assistant devices. That's increasingly becoming important to us. We're not just a software company anymore. It's not just ads and search. They're actual hardware products, and so we are affected by those supply chain issues and downstream. And so we, on our team, as a patents team, as a transactions team, have to take that into consideration in advising the client in risk mitigation, in preparing, and proactive in our preparations.
No, that makes total sense. And Ola, I'm going to ask you the next set of questions as well. I think you're really well suited for this. How do you reconcile these potentially competing goals, right? This risk mitigation versus the product protection, right? How are you thinking about, how financial and market data, but patent data as well might be playing into kind of these two things that might be heads at each other?
Yeah, it's actually a balancing act, a tough one, from the budget perspective. Do you allocate more budget towards risk mitigation efforts with your patent portfolio strategy, or more of product protection, protecting our differentiations, our differentiating products? So it's a balancing act, and it's one that we try to make and be right all the time. And that leads to portfolio right sizing. What's the right quality and quantity of the patent portfolio to achieve both goals, protecting Google's innovations, and also preparing to mitigate risks that may not even be currently apparent, but potential future risks. We're launching into different spaces. We are in different spaces, different markets. So, and we have a big target on us. Everyone knocks at our doors. So there's a lot to consider, and using patent data, patent analysis, competitive intelligence, financial and market data plays a huge part. And we battle with that every day. It's tough balancing act.
I can imagine. Deborah, Alyssa, anything you want to add to that?
I guess I would, that delicate balance is absolutely right. I think the key is to be as proactive as possible in portfolio development. So obviously we can't predict the future, but my view is that if you're working proactively to watch for changes in companies' financial health or in their market position, then you can do a lot better than scattershot preparation for risk mitigation, which does free up some resources, time, money, focus for better product protection. So I think if you can be proactive, that's really the key.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like all three of you are, so that's fantastic. Before we move on to kind of the more specifics, right, in terms of what data are you, what kinds of data are you using? What are the use cases? I want to ask, how are we measuring if this is effective, right? I know there's a lot of ways that we're measuring, effectiveness of patent data. People map onto products and, other kinds of things. But as we're bringing in the financial and market data, can we talk a little bit about how we measure? Is it useful to include? Because it's a big ask to bring in non-patent data into corporate patent strategy.
I can take a very high level shot at this, and maybe Deb can go into some of the granular details because, like I said, she lives and breathes this all day. For me, from a high level, one of the use cases is, valuation, balance of trade. So let's say an opco comes to us and says, hey, we want you to take a license to our portfolio. We have to do our valuation modeling. We'll bring in revenue data, patent data, market data. And it all starts with, what's my gut instinct telling me? What is my gut telling me? Is payment going to flow from Google to the other side or from the other side to Google? That's the first thing. And then what's that volume of that, payment flow? So I kind of have a sense of what that looks like. First, I know what that flow looks like, and I have a sense of maybe it's in this range. And then actually bringing in all of the data and putting it together and doing our balance of trade analysis with the data, I get some indication as to whether my gut instinct was correct in the first place. And then I'm now getting closer to what exactly the specific range or the payment would look like. And then that informs that, confirms or validates my gut feeling. And then we can, start talking and negotiating based on that position. So that's how I approach it. Deb?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. Once a company comes to us, we can do that balance of trade analysis, and ultimately the conversation ends at some number usually, and if the number is relatively close to where we expected, then we probably did a fairly good job of assessing the value. But I think that one of the things, and I mentioned before, is all about being proactive. One of the things that I do, and obviously I'm fortunate at Google to have the time and space to do it, and money, of course, but I can calculate a risk value and a mitigation value. And I do that using all of the various kinds of data that, we get from all these different sources. Is there, CAGR rising or falling? And what's the size of their portfolio? How does their portfolio overlap, the product categories, our portfolio, and vice versa? Litigation history, market position, R&D investment, headcount investment, all of these different things I put into what I call a risk calculation. And then I can also calculate a mitigation value or mitigation calculation that addresses how prepared we are to address a licensing discussion or a litigation should it occur. And that mitigation value, includes accounting of all the proactive prep work we've done, and taken together, the risk calculation and mitigation calculation help us to prioritize where we focus our efforts. And one of the most gratifying things is when a company that you sort of predict is going to knock on your door does, and it has happened. And I gave myself a great big pat on the back once when they actually came knocking. I was like, oh, I did it. And I had a personal party. I just was like, yay, me. So, I mean, there's some, validation of the efficacy, but otherwise it just helps us to prioritize.
Mm-hmm. No, that's...
Deb, can I ask you a quick follow-up question from the Q&A? I think it's relevant to the
of course.
one that you just mentioned. Are there any tools that could help predict those potential threats, right? If not, is there a way to do that effectively?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of developed my own little weights and measures of all the different things that I think are most important, and I think each company would have their own sort of valuation of each of those factors. But yeah, there are a bunch of tools that I like to use. There's certainly licensed, patent and litigation data providers, as well as market and financial data sources like Icon, Gartner, Inography, Cipher, PatSnap, BlueFoot, of course, RTX, Docket Navigator, Darthicky, all that stuff. But I think it's one of the things that I really want people to know is that you don't have to pay for it. Like it's great if you can, but there are lots of resources that are free that can be really useful. I use Seeking Alpha a lot for financial data that I need to gather and sort of provide in an organized, structured format. Crunchbase, Google Patents, of course, PTO's pages. I set alerts for Owler and Business and Market Insider. There's an M&A site called Intelligence, and then there's Statista, StatCounter, Point. Lots and lots of options. And of course, I set a bunch of Google alerts. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a ton of ways to get this data. And I think you just really have to settle down, whiteboard it out, what matters most to you, and sort of balance the risks and mitigations that you have.
That was awesome, Deb. And I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned the fact that there are free resources out there as well, right? Because I think, especially when you're trying to bring in, financial and market data, it can feel daunting to have to go to, Edgar, the SEC, right? Their kind of online platforms called Edgar and pull 10Ks or 10Qs or, actually sift through annual reports and all that stuff. And like you said, there's a lot of ways to get, snippets about specific companies if you want them. So appreciate that as well. I'm sure our attendees do too.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say too, I don't underestimate the value of your own internal, for those who are in-house, talking to your own finance teams, because you can also use your own internal finance. I mean, that this is a different use case. Instead of risk mitigation, instead of using but using your own internal financial data, in terms of profit margins and what do you expect the basis, how many basis points on a new product, what markets, the size of your market in that region, using that internal data to also help develop your portfolio strategy in terms of your patent portfolio of where do you want to go seek protection, how much protection, timing of when you should talk to your internal teams, because they have a lot of useful data too that will inform that strategy as well.
That's a great point. I remember when I first became a portfolio manager at HP, I did that. And I went to the sales and marketing teams too, because they know the products, right? Like it was like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? And trying to figure out what this is. Their job is to figure out what this is, what the differentiators are, how to market it. And so, internal resources are fantastic. I think we've gotten a really good conversation of this. I want to get more into the nitty gritty. Bobby, do you mind going to the next slide? And we can talk a little bit about how we're using the data. So here we just threw a lot of potential use cases that I think have come out through this conversation, competitive analysis, benchmarking, budget, portfolio strategy, licensing, litigation. I want to know more about the practical concerns, right? As we're pulling in, with patent data, I think we all understand kind of what's available out there, right? It's become a known entity in the last 10 to 15 years. It's all digitized. It's updated oftentimes in real time. There's various tools. When we're bringing in financial and market data, it can be something completely new. So what are your practical concerns or things that you think about as you're integrating the financial and market data into your corporate strategy? And also, are we missing use cases, right? Feel free to add to that as well.
I can talk a little bit about this. I think one of the things that we might be missing in all of the types of data and the use cases is the individual aspect of things. I think sometimes, and that's something we try to also follow, changes in leadership. Do we have some sort of history about somebody that's now at the helm of leadership in a certain company or a certain non-practicing entity? What are they prone to? What's their history? What have they done in the past? That could sometimes drive their strategy and help us in preparing proactively that, hey, look, there's a new head honcho at this company or this NPE. This is what they're likely going to do. And if we have relationships there, maybe we approach them before they even approach us. So there's that type of sort of personality, people, network, and engagement aspect of it too that can come into play.
I was going to also add to your list of use cases. I think it's also beneficial for M&A purposes too. Sometimes you can identify a potential acquisition because of what's happening in their patent portfolio. Maybe it's a space you want to move into, and then you can look at that data as well and say, you know what, that's going to be a complement to where we are and is part of our strategic growth initiatives. This aligns, and we want to now, we've identified the targets, and you can help, again, for internal teams. I know we have a variety of panelists, but you can be also internally an asset to your corporate development team by saying, hey, this is an interesting prospect and I can get this information because of competitive analysis, benchmarking, and whatnot. And this is a complement to our portfolio.
Yeah, that's a,
Yeah,
that's a
I guess I would add to that. Oh, sorry, Ramya. I was gonna say I would add that, you know, maybe just a caveat about patent data. A lot of the providers will provide like a quality score, and it's been my experience that those quality scores tend not to really map to my idea of quality. But instead, you know, the quality is really just a calculation of how similar the patents might be to patents that have been asserted before, which isn't really a corpus of high quality patents necessarily, but rather whatever might pass the stiff test for Rule 11 or summary judgment. And so, you know, that I would give that as sort of a, you know, cautionary tale. And then, you know, classification data can be really helpful for like hardware manufacturing consumer products, but it's especially not helpful in internet, software, cloud. So I'd say, you know, be careful to use it only directionally, but not religiously to guide your analysis.
I think that's a great point. I think using, you know, potentially just classification again in kind of the non-hardware technologies, it can be pretty difficult. But I want to ask as well, you know, as you're bringing in kind of this financial and market data, you know, are you, you know, Deb, you mentioned a lot of resources that might involve more maybe manual work on your part or your team's part to, you know, integrate into the analyses that you're doing. But when you're looking at these things, what level of granularity are you trying to bring in? Are you bringing in kind of market data? Are you bringing in company specific data? When you look at a company, is it for every industry they're in, or are you targeting based on kind of what's important to where your future strategy is? I'm curious how you guys approach that.
Well, I think there's two really important pieces to pay attention to. And one is, you know, any space in which that company overlaps with our company, you know, in terms of the product portfolio and potentially patent portfolio. But the other piece that I think is really important is just sort of understanding what are their key products, whether that's key because it drives their user base or because it's what they market, you know, to consumers, or, you know, what brings in the most revenue, right? I mean, the reality is the most important stuff that they are going to have is the biggest buck item generally, and that's the stuff that I really dig into, as opposed to, you know, looking at every single thing that they have. So we focus on what we consider to be key products.
That makes sense. Follow the money, right? I think that's
Exactly.
applicable in every single type of job we do. I know we are getting close to the end of the webinar, so I want to move on to the next part of this. I'm going to keep it short, and I know we also have a long list of questions that seem really interesting that we want to get to you guys as well. So, Bobby, do you mind moving to the next slide? So you know, here we just talked a little bit about what data do you use. I think if there's, you know, we can share these slides after the webinar, and in the interest of making sure we have time for questions, I just want to say anything that we're missing here, right, from the panelists, anything that we should be including in terms of the patent data or the non-patent data that you're considering.
Well, at the risk of talking too much, one of the things that I follow that isn't really here and it's not really structured data necessarily is sentiment analysis. So how is the company or the product, you know, being received in the market? Is there, you know, chatter? Is somebody getting a lot of discussion or a lot of press? And, you know, there's a bunch of different ways to measure that, but mostly it's just sort of getting a feel for it. So it's a little bit harder to sort sort of objective, get objective data there. But you can read all the SEP reports you want, but like if people are talking about a company, there's real value there. So I guess I would say that's something to pay attention to.
Oh, it's interesting. And then, Ola, I know you had mentioned kind of the people data too, which I think is missing here as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I was wondering if it was captured on the corporate trees, but yeah, definitely people data, the head count, where they hiring, where they laying off. If a certain company just laid off an entire licensing team, that might be an indicator of a change in philosophy within the company, for example. So the people data, definitely.
Oh, makes sense. Well, again, thank you guys. And, we, as I mentioned, have a ton of great questions. If we'll try and answer as many as we can before the end of the webinar. But Rachel, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for a great discussion here. So I think a lot of panelists talked about kind of how we use this data, right? When we talk about that, we talked about using it for portfolio strategy, identifying potential threats, doing balance of trade analysis, but kind of besides these kind of more defense matters, like those that, kind of identifying those that might sue us. I think one of the attendees was asking how much this type of data or effort is applied to kind of disposition of non-core IP assets, right? Where you don't overlap and, kind of IP that was left stranded by R&D project that ended or from an M&A integration, in your practice, in your, kind of in your role, like, do you guys also utilize this type data to find non-core IP and have a strategy around that too?
I'll take that real quick, Rachel. I will to the attendee who asked that. Aside from using it from a risk mitigation or portfolio development, I use it also on my team to inform what assets we might want to get rid of from a culling perspective, right? Again, maybe the market is changed, right? You have market data. This is a aging technology, this sector, the demand isn't there. Using again, automotive, for example, right? You have everybody's on the EV engines, right? The supply to that is going to take off versus the old, ICE engine, right? There's something there, and that might inform what you do in terms of, do I maintain something or not? That may also inform, okay, I'm going to maintain in certain countries versus others. So I think it is not purely just defensive, but you can use it for a proactive way as well.
Great.
Yeah, I can also add to that. Yeah, I think I agree with what Alyssa said. You can use it in portfolio sizing. You call portfolios based on that. It could also be something you trade with. So if I have surplus in certain areas, or the business has moved away and we have IP, it could be patents that I could use in a swap where, zero sum payment between us and another company that might need such assets. It could be donated for a certain cause. It could be given to a startup company that we want to, encourage, help, push in a certain direction. It could be used to bridge gap in business deals, where you throw in some patents, and those could be patents from that surplus area. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Ola. Deb, do you have anything to add, or should we move to another question?
I guess I would just echo what Ola said about patent swaps. It's a really useful way to sort of get the right balance of stuff in your portfolio, and especially if you're working with a partner or a friendly company in the industry. That's really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. It could become part of your negotiation. I don't want to say tactic, but kind of, part of your negotiation game, right? To having that things you could swap with, having and identifying surplus versus where yours are gap. And I think that's a really interesting approach to kind of use this data for. So I think one last question, I think is from the outside counsel, asking how would you like outside counsel to make use of this data? Is there anything that you could kind of, when you work with outside counsel, is there anything that you see them using this type of data for the benefit of their clients?
Yeah, we like to work really closely with our outside counsel on targeting strategies and planning for the portfolio based on what our goals are. And that's most helpful, especially as we're planning, doing targeted prosecution, expecting, that something that we might be early on in the life cycle of a technology, could eventually apply to another company. And if we are in good, constant communication with our outside counsel, they are paying attention to the development of products in the space. They're seeing who is launching in the space or who might become a player. And we're always in conversation for every single case. Like, what is the point of this case? What is our ultimate goal for protecting our product? And, what action might we take if a company enters the space that we're already in?
And just to double down on what Deb talked about, just practical or just kind of high level examples of how that could come into play is, you file a patent on a particular technology. We're early in the space. There's a lot of ways. We have a very good spec, in short, but we've protected Google's differentiating feature. But it's such an early technology that you probably want to keep that patent open, and then you have a particular target in mind that you believe will or is in that space as a fast follower or a follower, and you want to target them with continuations based on that open. You could continue to file several cons that would also target as part of our targeted prosecution strategy. Or we could be in a current discussion where they're friendly or unfriendly with a certain opco. As soon as those discussions start, our team is letting our portfolio development group, including the outside counsel, know that, hey, this conversations could go friendly or south. Let's start building a defensive or offensive strategy. And so we're using the competitive intel, the market data, the information that we have, the patent data, to inform the targeted prosecution filing.
Makes a lot of sense. And again, I know we've run a few minutes over, so I just want to conclude by saying thank you so much to our panelists. This has been such an interesting, robust conversation and discussion. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives with us and the over 100 other people that joined the webinar. I also don't want to forget to share the results of the poll, so I will do that as I'm saying my thank yous. If anybody has any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Rachel or I, or if you'd like a demo, I'm happy to do that as well. But again, thank you so much, Ola, Alyssa, and Deb. This was absolutely fantastic.
Thanks for having us.
Rania and Rachel.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, with that, we will end the webinar, and we will be sharing a recording with people if they'd like to see it. So again, don't hesitate to reach out for that as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.